Imagine a conflict where the very ground beneath your feet becomes a weapon, where strategic retreats aren't signs of weakness, but maybe strokes of brilliant genius,
Hmm.
and where a single rugged mountain can transform into this unbreakable symbol of unyielding resistance.
Yeah, quite the image.
Today, we're embarking on part 3 of our comprehensive deep dive into the complex, often brutal, but always fascinating history of the war between the Ethiopian Derg Government, that's the ruling military junta, and the EPLF, the Eritrean People's Liberation Front, fighting for their nation's independence.
And it's a really crucial part of the story we're telling.
Absolutely. If you're just joining us and maybe haven't had a chance to listen to the first 2 parts of this epic 7-part series, we definitely recommend going back. It'll give you the full context for these profound, really transformative events.
You definitely need that background for what happens next.
Exactly. In this deep dive, we're zeroing in on the Ethiopian Derg Army's 3rd military campaign. This thing exploded with intense ferocity across the Eritrean landscape in January and February of 1979.
A really concentrated period.
It really was. And this wasn't just another engagement. It was pivotal, a real make-or-break moment that led directly to the establishment of one of the most, well, legendary and enduring defensive lines in modern military history, the Nakfa Front.
The famous Nakfa Front, its origins are right here.
Our mission today is to meticulously understand that intricate dance of forces, the calculated strategic decisions made under, unimaginable pressure, and critically, how these brutally fought battles fundamentally reshape the entire landscape of the conflict for years to come.
Yeah.
We'll try to extract the core insights, uncover the surprising shifts, and truly grasp the sheer grit that defined this absolutely critical period.
And what's truly fascinating here, I think, is how this 3rd campaign represents a massive escalation, after 2
Yeah.
previous offensives that had largely failed.
Right? They've been pushed back.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This was a truly determined, almost desperate, all-in push by the Derg to finally break the EPLF's iron resolve, to crush the independence movement once and for all.
High stakes.
Extremely high stakes. And it profoundly tested the adaptability, the resilience, and frankly, the strategic ingenuity of both sides. What you'll discover as we explore this is how a series of tactical withdrawals by the EPLF, while far from being signs of weakness or defeat.
Which is how it might look initially.
Right. But they were actually brilliant, calculated strategic moves. They masterfully reshaped the battlefield to their advantage, effectively negating the Derg's overwhelming technological and numerical superiority.
Using the terrain.
Precisely. And ultimately leading to an outcome that the Derg, well, they certainly did not anticipate. It's a masterclass, really, in leveraging terrain, foresight, and disciplined execution against a seemingly insurmountable foe.
Okay, let's unpack the initial moves then. This 3rd major campaign, January 1979, the Derg had already been rebuffed twice, suffered significant setbacks. So this time, they clearly came with a renewed, almost desperate vigor. Where did they focus their initial efforts, and what kind of forces did they bring to bear?
Well, the Derg's strategy for this 3rd offensive was pretty explicit and brutal. A massive 2-pronged attack. It was specifically designed to split the EPLF's attention and resources, which were already stretched pretty thin.
Makes sense. Hit them in 2 places at once.
Exactly. Their initial targets were Genphalom and Mamid, or Amamim. These were critical strongholds, basically guarding key access routes into the EPLF-held heartland of Sahel.
Kind of like gatekeepers.
That's a good way to put it. Gatekeepers in rugged, mountainous terrain. And to make sure they had the overwhelming force they needed for what they intended to be a decisive blow, the Derg brought in significant reinforcements.
Where from?
Well, from Asmara, the regional capital, and Agordat, another key garrison town, they deployed veteran units and mechanized brigades to bolster the Genphalom front.
Okay.
Simultaneously, fresh forces from Massawa, the crucial port city, and its surrounding strategic areas were brought in to reinforce the Mamid sector.
So a huge buildup.
Oh, immense. Tens of thousands of troops, numerous tanks, extensive artillery. This clearly signaled their intent, overwhelm, and simultaneously breach the EPLF lines. They were hoping, really hoping, to achieve a decisive victory where their previous attempts had just ended in costly failure.
So a truly concentrated push, simultaneous from 2 different directions. That makes a lot of tactical sense from the Derg's perspective. Apply maximum pressure, maybe create a pincer. Given that kind of overwhelming force, how did that initial offensive play out, particularly at Genphalom? Our sources indicate the EPLF faced some truly relentless pressure there.
Indeed, the pressure at Genfalum was, well, nothing short of brutal. From the moment the offensive began, the Derg army launched continuous, aggressive attempts to breach the EPLF's defensive lines. Pretty much. The fighting was incredibly intense, focusing particularly on the right flank of the EPLF's 31st Brigade. For an entire month. Think about that. A whole month. From dawn till dusk and often through the freezing nights, these EPLF positions face relentless assaults. Human wave attacks, supported by just thunderous artillery barrages that turn the landscape into, well, a moonscape.
Unimaginable.
Imagine being part of that 31st Brigade for over 6 grueling weeks under constant fire, day and night, holding ground against a numerically and technologically superior foe. The sheer psychological and physical toll must have been immense.
Incredible tenacity.
Absolutely. Despite this relentless onslaught, the EPLF units showed incredible tenacity, defending their position for a month and a half, repelling attack after attack. It speaks volumes about their discipline, their will to resist, and the leadership. But
There's always a but.
there is. As the weeks wore on, the right wing of their front was getting increasingly stretched thin, resources dwindling. They were becoming precariously vulnerable to a devastating encirclement.
And that's where we see that EPLF strategic thinking again, isn't it? Instead of just holding ground at all costs, risking being completely overrun, which would have been catastrophic, they made a calculated, incredibly difficult move. What was that? And what was the rationale behind it?
Precisely. This wasn't a rout, not a retreat born of defeat. It was a textbook example of a calculated, tactical withdrawal, executed under extreme duress to avoid that potentially disastrous encirclement.
So when did this happen?
On January 15th, after weeks of relentless fighting, their right flank critically exposed, the EPLF made the strategic decision to pull back from Genfalum. Their new defensive positions were established at a naturally formidable narrow gorge called Kogai.
Kogai, way there.
The brilliance of the move lies in their understanding of the terrain, how to leverage it. The Kogai Gorge is naturally constricted, a bottleneck.
Okay, I see.
This forced the much larger, better-equipped Derg army into a confined space, and that dramatically limited the effectiveness of their heavy artillery, and especially their tanks.
Right, tanks need room to maneuver.
Exactly. Tanks thrive on open ground. Here, they were channeled into pre-sighted kill zones within the gorge. Their long-range artillery couldn't get the right firing angles, couldn't disperse ordnance effectively. It forced the Derg into a brutal, close-quarters slugfest.
Playing to the EPLF's strengths.
Absolutely. Their light infantry, intimate knowledge of every rock and crevice, superior maneuverability in that terrain, it became paramount. But the fighting didn't stop, of course. It continued fiercely in this new defensive line, which actually merged with some other existing lines. It showed remarkable adaptability on the fly.
But then, just as you'd expect the battle for Kogai to intensify even further, the Derg suddenly, unexpectedly, shifted gears again. January 25th, 1979. They pulled a maneuver that threatened to unravel everything. This must have sent shockwaves through the EPLF command. What was this critical pivot?
It was an absolute critical turning point. It really demonstrated the fluidity, the unpredictability of this war. The Derg made an unexpected and frankly audacious move. They effectively abandoned the Mahmud front.
The one they were attacking in parallel.
The very same one. Instead, they landed fresh units, mostly from their 508th Task Force at Marsa Tekle, a small coastal landing point, and immediately began marching them rapidly inland towards Imamim.
Wow. Okay, that raises questions. Was this planned all along? A feint? Or were they reacting because Kogai was proving too tough?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Was it a pre-planned diversion or a reaction to the EPLF's resilience at Genfalum and Kogai? We can't be entirely sure from the sources, but regardless of the intent, the immediate impact was profound. This new line of advance, deep in the northeastern Sahel, instantly rendered the strategic importance of both Mahmud and even the newly established Kogai front largely obsolete.
Because they were being bypassed.
Completely bypassed. The EPLF had no choice but to immediately abandon those hard-won defensive positions. They had to intercept this new, fast-moving, and extremely dangerous threat. Any delay would have allowed the Derg to establish a deep, irreversible foothold.
So the EPLF had to react, and react incredibly fast, to this totally new axis of attack. The stakes must have been astronomically high. How did they manage to split their forces and redirect them so quickly? Especially when they were already engaged, you can almost feel the urgency.
The urgency was immense, almost palpable. And the EPLF's response was a testament to their disciplined command structure, their deep familiarity with the terrain, and, well, the sheer grit of their fighters. They executed a rapid, two-pronged redirection of their army, a logistical and tactical feat in itself.
And how did they split them?
Okay, so one part of the EPLF force immediately rushed to the rugged hills of the northeastern Sahel region. Their critical mission: intercept and stalk this newly landed Derg force from advancing further inland. Basically, a desperate delaying action.
Okay, hold them up. And the other part?
The other part rapidly disengaged from Alphabet and began forming completely new defensive positions. They strategically positioned themselves around the key town of Nakfa, specifically on the right and left hilly banks of the Hidai River.
Ah, so this is the beginning of the Nakfa Front.
This forced relocation, while incredibly challenging and dangerous, was, in hindsight, the precise genesis of what would become the legendary Nakfa Front. It was a high-stakes gamble, a race against time, but absolutely necessary to counter the Derg's sudden shift. They had to abandon ground to secure a future.
With the EPLF now forced to regroup around Nakfa by the Hidai River, this new front line, born out of sheer necessity, began to take shape, the nascent Nakfa Front. Knowing the stakes, how quickly did the Derg pursue? Did they try to stop this consolidation?
Oh, absolutely. The Derg immediately recognized this as a fleeting opportunity. They had to prevent the EPLF from establishing any kind of new, stable stronghold. And what's truly fascinating here is the sheer concentration of force they threw at this emerging position.
Like what?
Task Force 508, that's basically a reinforced division-sized unit, multiple infantry brigades, Soviet T-55 tanks, heavy artillery, armored personnel carriers dispatched with ruthless efficiency. They were joined by elements of Task Force 506A, and all heavily supported by their Air Force, conducting relentless bombing and strafing runs.
Their objective was clear then.
Utterly clear. Deprive the EPLF of any foothold around the Hidai River. Break them before they could reestablish a cohesive defense. And additionally, to secure their rear and lines of communication, Task Force 506B was strategically deployed across the Karen Alphabet area.
A massive deployment.
It really showcased the Derg's absolute determination to crush the EPLF decisively in this new, rapidly evolving theater.
And how did that initial desperate clash at the Hidai River play out? Was it just another holding action? Or did the EPLF have a deeper plan brewing, even as they were digging in?
Well, the Hidai River Gorge became a maelstrom. Heavy fighting from February 2nd. It raged without pause for 2 full days. Just brutal exchanges, the air thick with dust, gunfire, explosions. The EPLF fought with everything they had, knowing they had to prevent a swift Derg breakthrough towards Nakfa.
But they were thinking ahead.
Even as they fought, under intense pressure, yes. The EPLF commanders were already thinking several steps ahead. They made a crucial, almost prescient calculation. They anticipated that the Derg might attempt a cunning flanking maneuver.
Instead of just head-on assaults.
Right. They believed the Derg would try to bypass the direct Hidai defenses and push straight towards Nakfa through a place called Naro, a more circuitous route, but potentially less defended.
How could they know that?
Years of operating in the region, deep understanding of the terrain, probably excellent intelligence gathering, too. This foresight was incredible.
So another tactical withdrawal.
Yeah.
Even after just setting up a new line. That takes immense discipline.
It really does. Discipline, strategic trust in leadership, a willingness to constantly adapt under fire. This was yet another calculated move, testament to their command and control. Not weakness, strategic agility.
So what was the goal this time? Where did they finally decide to make their definitive stand? The point of no return.
Okay, so to counter that anticipated flanking move through Naro, EPLF units, once again, with great precision, abandoned the Hidai River defenses. This happened around February 4th. This allowed them to pivot and head directly for the vicinity of Nakfa itself. By withdrawing slightly further, they then encamped on the right and left of the strategically commanding Mount Denden.
Mount Denden. That name comes up a lot.
It's central to this story. This towering, rugged peak offered natural defensive advantages few other locations could. This was it. Their definitive, final line of defense, meticulously chosen because its heights, cliffs, broken terrain, offered unparalleled defense against a superior force.
Transforming it into a fortress.
Exactly. This wasn't just another defensive line, it was the deliberate and final establishment of the legendary Nakfa Front. Established formally on February 5th, chosen and engineered to maximize their defensive capabilities against what they knew would be relentless assaults. You can almost picture the sheer will, the back-breaking effort, the determination required to hold such a critical position, knowing this was their absolute last viable fallback point before Nakfa itself fell.
And the Derg, understanding Denden's importance, wouldn't have given up easily. They must have poured everything into trying to dislodge the EPLF. What was their immediate move, and how did the EPLF organize their defenses on Denden? Can we get specific about units and commanders?
You're right, the Derg knew Denden was the linchpin, seized Denden and Nakfa Falls. So from the moment the EPLF began digging in on February 5th, right up until February 9th, the Derg launched relentless, aggressive assaults, full-scale attempts, massed infantry, tank support, continuous artillery.
But the EPLF held.
They held, steadfastly resisted, held their ground with extraordinary resolve. To organize this critical defense, they meticulously positioned their brigades, leveraging every contour of the mountain.
Who was where?
Okay, the 58th Brigade held the left flank, commanded by the formidable duo of Isaias to Waldbrand, known as Wedi Flansa and Hale Samuel, or China.
Okay.
At the very center, guarding the most direct approach, was the veteran 51st Brigade, led by Muhammad Ali Clay and Ali Ibrahim. And on the right flank, securing the mountainous terrain overlooking the approaches, was the 8th Brigade, commanded by Omar Hassan Tiwal and Desail Koli Wedi Koli.
A strong lineup.
A very deliberate, highly organized, layered defense. They knew the stakes. And crucially, they quickly brought in reinforcements. They redeployed the 2nd Battalion of the 70th Brigade from the recently abandoned Mahmed area.
Bringing everyone forward.
Yes, and for fire support across the entire developing front, they strategically deployed the 3rd Artillery Battalion of the 76th Brigade. Meanwhile, the Derg kept attacking, relentlessly. They knew the EPLF needed time to fully fortify Denden, and they were desperate to prevent that consolidation. Every hour was a battle, not just for ground, but for time itself.
While this main desperate battle raged at Denden, the EPLF wasn't just reacting defensively, were they? Our sources indicate they launched a critical counterattack elsewhere, almost simultaneously. Who was that about? What was the objective there?
It's another example of their remarkable ability to manage multiple high-stakes threats simultaneously, even under the most intense fire. While the main drama unfolded at Denden, an equally vital situation was developing over in the northeastern Sahel region.
Okay, what was happening there?
The EPLF had crucial logistical goods stockpiled there: food, water, medical supplies, ammunition, spare parts, stuff that hadn't yet been moved to safety. And the main road to Goretto, their primary evacuation route, had already been cut off by advancing enemy forces.
So they were trapped with vital supplies.
Pretty much. But instead of being paralyzed by the threat at Denden, the EPLF swiftly launched a targeted counterattack in the northeastern Sahel. The objective wasn't long-term ground capture, but to clear the region just enough to create a safe passage.
A rescue mission for their supplies.
Essentially, yes. And they successfully executed this dangerous operation, managing to transport all their invaluable belongings to the more secure locations of Kibrut, Jeriger, and Tev for protection. This critical operation involved fierce, localized fighting that continued until February 10th.
And then what happened to those forces?
Crucially, once this mission was accomplished, battalions from that 70th Brigade, specifically commanded by Saleheru and Germain Mahari, were swiftly redeployed. They immediately went to reinforce the EPLF positions at Denden, strategically placed between the 51st and 8th Brigades in Nakfa.
Wow, dynamic reallocation. Strengthening the core defense just when needed.
Exactly. It shows incredible command, control, communication under duress, strengthening the core defense at the most critical point at exactly the right moment.
So after weeks of relentless fighting, tactical withdrawals, daring logistical ops, the stage is now set. The final, decisive engagement around Mount Denden. The EPLF has reinforced, but they're still under immense continuous pressure. They need to solidify their defenses. Knowing this, what bold, maybe even audacious move did the EPLF make on February 13th to decisively shift the momentum?
It had become abundantly clear to the EPLF leadership. A truly secure, long-term defense at Denden just couldn't be fully established under these relentless assaults. The constant pressure was wearing them down, preventing them from digging in properly.
Passive defense wasn't enough.
It wasn't enough. They realized they needed to break the cycle of attrition, seize the initiative. So in an incredibly audacious, frankly risky decision, the EPLF army made the strategic choice to unleash a major counterattack on the Ethiopian army positions around Mount Denden on February 13th.
Wow, going on the offensive while trying to defend?
It was bold. This wasn't a small skirmish. This was a full-scale offensive aimed at decisively pushing the Derg back and ending their third campaign right there. The battle's climax was marked by exceptionally heavy, brutal fighting. It raged without mercy for 2 intense days, reaching its crescendo on February 15th.
The audacity is striking.
It really highlights their strategic boldness, their understanding of when to flip the switch from defense to offense.
And what was the outcome of this pivotal make-or-break counterattack? Did it work?
It wasn't just a success, it was a shocking and absolutely decisive defeat for the Derg. By the evening of February 15th, after those 2 days of relentless counteroffensive, the enemy was finally pushed back. First, back to the Hidai River Gorge.
The place they'd fought to bypass.
Exactly, and then even further back to Itehaleb. The Derg army suffered truly heavy casualties. Their invasion force in that specific area was shattered. A significant blow was the loss of a powerful Soviet-made T-55 tank, destroyed and abandoned.
A major loss, symbolically and materially.
Absolutely. This defeat shocked the Ethiopian command, led to the complete collapse of their invasion force in that area, a profound strategic failure for them. And to add to it, EPLF forces managed to capture approximately 900 enemy light weapons rifles, machine guns, anti-tank launchers, plus a substantial amount of desperately needed ammunition.
Huge gains.
Huge. So this wasn't just a battle won. This dramatic EPLF victory unequivocally marked the definitive end of the Third Ethiopian Offensive against the EPLF. It was a testament to their extraordinary resilience, their strategic acumen, and their willingness to take incredibly bold action against overwhelming odds. The Derg's third great push had crumbled.
So, the third offensive concludes not with a Derg victory, but with a decisive EPLF triumph at Denden, halting the Derg's advance. But the true enduring legacy of this entire campaign goes beyond that single battle, doesn't it? It's about the solidification of the Nakfa Front. What does this front truly represent in the grander scheme, and how significant did it become?
You're absolutely right. The solidification of the Nakfa Front was arguably the most enduring and pivotal outcome of this entire campaign. It was formally established in the wake of this third offensive, specifically on February 5th, 1979, centered around Mount Denden.
And its endurance is legendary.
It's astounding. For 9 unbroken years, this defensive line defeated multiple successive large-scale invasions launched by the Derg, each one aimed at breaking the EPLF's back. Which really raises an important question. What made this line so incredibly formidable, so resilient? How could it defy an enemy with seemingly limitless resources for so long?
It became more than just trenches and bunkers.
Much more. It quickly transcended its physical form to become a profound symbol. The Nakfa Front came to represent Eritrean perseverance, unwavering dedication, the unshakable will to achieve independence. It witnessed remarkable feats of bravery, ingenuity, sacrifice. It stood as a historic testimony to the determination of an entire people resisting overwhelming odds. It became a moral and psychological barrier for the Derg, just as much as a physical one.
9 years unbroken. Can you paint a more vivid picture of its physical layout? How was it structured? How extensive did it eventually become?
It was far from simple. It was a complex, meticulously designed defensive system, a real feat of military engineering, leveraging that rugged Sahel terrain to the max. EPLF forces established a series of interconnected positions, a network of strong points stretching across the landscape.
Can you name some?
Sure. From left to right, positions included Taba Bilhat, also known as Enda Dabali, then Taba Timamen, Key Mariat, Merkebna, Taba Salam, the critical Fidelpe, Rigol, Globe, Wancha, the towering Denden itself, Fernello by the Mo River, Nakara, and finally, Testa.
And the brigades holding these.
They were arrayed in a deliberate, integrated order. The 58th, 51st, 70th, and 77th Brigades were positioned from left to right across this sprawling front, each responsible for a specific, heavily fortified sector. They didn't just dig trenches, they built complex systems of underground bunkers, command centers, hospitals, supply depots, effectively an underground city, largely immune to aerial bombardment.
Incredible engineering.
And facing them,
the Ethiopian army lines, specifically the powerful 508th Task Force, were dug in at strategic points directly opposite. Places like Chegor Taba, Taba Amelto, positions along the Hidai River, Gul Denden, Harina Sabate, and Kibret Saida, stretching across the entire front.
and it grew even larger.
Astonishingly, yes. Subsequent fighting and strategic maneuvers dramatically stretched the Nakfa Front. It became intricately connected with the northeastern Sahel and Halhal Barka fronts, eventually reaching an incredible 667 kilometers in length.
667 kilometers. Imagine the logistical nightmare, the defensive challenge of maintaining such an expansive line for so long, under constant threat, with a fraction of the resources. It was a testament not just to military strategy, but to sheer, unyielding human spirit.
So what does this entire deep dive into the Third Derg Offensive mean for us? It means understanding military history isn't just about dates and battles. It's about the critical, often desperate decisions made under fire, the incredible adaptability required to survive, and the sheer human will that ultimately shapes outcomes.
Hmm.
The Third Derg Offensive might have been an all-out attempt to break the EPLF, but it inadvertently led to the creation of their most formidable stronghold. You can clearly see how, even facing overwhelming odds, meticulous planning, courageous execution, and an indomitable spirit can truly turn the tide, forging something enduring from the crucible of adversity.
And this solidification of the Nakfa Front, this unbroken line defying massive invasions for 9 years, it really raises a powerful question for you to consider. How did this single geographical feature, transformed by sheer resilience, brilliant engineering, and unwavering tenacity, become such a potent psychological and strategic barrier?
Yeah.
How did it not just hold, but fundamentally reshape the entire conflict, forcing the Derg to change its approach and becoming this profound symbol of unyielding determination for almost a decade? It's a story of human will against overwhelming force that still resonates.
That's a powerful question for you to mull over long after this deep dive ends. Join us next time for part 4 of our deep dive as we continue to explore the fascinating and often surprising insights from this compelling historical journey.